Hi everyone. Something I briefly want to say regarding the word parry. So in the comments to my various videos I've made over the last few months, I've noticed that in the modern swordsmanship community, whether it's sport fencing or historical fencing or oriental martial arts or whatever, there is some disagreement, shall we say, about what the word parry means and how that's interpreted, as opposed to words like block, for example. Now, first of all, I say for my part, from my perspective, the way that I use the word parry in my videos and things I write and in my lessons and so on is essentially any defensive action. Okay, so when someone attacks you, if you just stick the sword in the way to defend yourself, I would call that a parry. If someone attacks you and I deflect the blow off to the side and then attack back, I would call that a parry. If someone attacked me on this line and I close the line while moving offline to enable a riposte from there, I would call that a parry. So any type of, and whether it's with the edge or the flat or the back, which you can beat with, sort of flick an opposing weapon aside with, anything like this I would call a type of parry. And yes, for me, some parries are more like a direct stop. In other words, if someone attacks me on this side, for example, stop, riposte, or on this side, stop, riposte. Equally, if they attack straight down the middle, if I knock their sword off to the side as it descends, bam, and then attack back, that again is another form of, that's a deflection and then a riposte. But ultimately there's a defensive blade action in there, and then of course I attack in my tempo back at them. So for me, a parry is any defensive action that's then usually followed, if I'm doing what I should be doing, by what I call a riposte, that is an attack of my own in my own tempo after I've defended myself. Now historically, it's clear that the word parry, and it was used in many different languages with different spellings and said in slightly different ways, but the word parry or parade, as it's sometimes written, could mean other things, or more specifically it could mean only a specific subset of the things that I've just mentioned. One example of that is that if you look at foil fencing from the 19th century, so if you look at foil fencing texts from a time where foil fencing had become a sport, but it was still applicable to duels and potentially, and also to going on and studying the military sword later, the sabre. In foil fencing, a parry in a lot of these texts is very specifically a circular movement of the sword, either in one direction or in the other direction. Okay, so if I'm crossed with an opponent's sword and they want to, we're both crossed on the outside, so neither of us has a direct line to thrust, they would disengage under my sword, and to defend against that I would also, there are various things I could do. I could close the centre line, or I could also do a circular disengage and a circular parry. So defending against a thrust with foil by doing this circular movement, so as their blade comes up the centre, I come under the blade and push it back to the outside, so keeping myself safe. This is what was specifically known as a parry or parade in foil fencing. And it's clear that some sabre and potentially late backsword sources use the word parry only for this circular movement, whilst they use the word ward, guard or stop for defending against cuts. So for example, parrying in prime or second or St. George, head guard, these kind of, or terce or cart, these sort of closing the line against the cut. So they call a parry a circular against a thrust, and a ward or a stop or a guard against a cut, essentially putting up a barrier against that cut. But in 19th century sabre sources, they also then start to use the word parry for these as well. So it gets quite confusing if you're studying the original sources, because sometimes they use parry for everything, as I do, but sometimes they only use parry for this circular movement against the thrust. So there you go. When I'm talking in my videos, when I say parry, I mean a defensive action of any sort that protects you from the opponent's attack. Thank you.